I'm Richard Creith and I'm now enjoying this young bit. Well, that was the Killinchy in '65, I suppose, and the 350 race. And Billy was just back for the TT, and he'd got on well in the TT, and it was hard to beat at any time, but we were all feared home when he came back for the TT. He was like a new rider then, far quicker. But anyway, he ran away and left us, and as the race went on, I was begun to get a wee bit better and a wee bit better to finish up. I got up on him and got squeezed by somewhere, but usually with Billy, I like to follow him a while and look for a weak place and pass him real fast and get away from him, but it didn't work that day. He stayed with me. And I knew he was going to beat me in the last lap. I knew that he would beat me. I knew what I kept him behind me to the last bend, and I thought he'll do it now, but I know the only way he could do it was ride round me, and that wouldn't have been that easy. Either that or go up the hand side. So I could hear the bike on my right hand side, and I closed right hand to the grass, and I had to put on the brakes, and I just managed to beat him. That was on the Killinchy in '65. 2 years I had rode Joe's bikes, and that was the only time that 500 stopped with me. And before the race, Joe said to me that they would need it to change the big end on it, but he says it'll probably do this race, but he says if it starts to vibrate, will you just stop? So I went well and I was getting on well, and but I lead on a couple of laps for the end, started to vibrate, and I had to stop. But when Joe was telling me about to stop if it started to vibrate too much, I said to him, Joe, how much is too much? And he says, Sonny, when you see 3 sets of handlebars on every side of her, you stop her. My first race run was at Tandergee in 1961 on a 500 BSA. And I was surprised to win it. And I couldn't believe it when I did win it, but I never forgot it. It was a good feeling to win you anyway. Every race I went to, I always tried my hardest, done my best, and tried always to better myself if I could. Ray Fleck was a South African, and him and another boy, Tom Gill, done all the continental races and had a big van, and they were very scarce of money, and they were getting second-hand parts and tyres and things and scraping a leaving whatever way they could. And if they at that northwest lane was starting about, I come in after the practice, and Raymond Fleck is sitting in the grass, and I said to him, what way did you get on? And he says, I had to stop. And I says, what was wrong? He says, the bike was vibrating that much along them big straights. He says it was slackening all the pins in my legs. I suppose my best race, or my most memorable race, should have been the one in the Grand Prix. And I never was superstitious, but I mind that morning again. I was up early, and I was out, and I always say a habit of looking down the rivers below the house, and I looked down the river to see. I do that all the time, and that's a special morning. I was up early, and when I went to around the corner, there was a magpie sitting on the top of the gate, and thought to myself, I'm no superstitious, but I suddenly looked at me a minute and I thought that's a good start to the day. I mind sitting in the starting line, and my brother was always with me, and he said to me before the start, go nice and steady and watch yourself. And I mind sitting at the start and everything was quiet and looking around me and thinking to myself, what am I doing among all these mad men anyway? But again, I made a bad start and was maybe about 8th or 10th for a while in that race. But again, I kept improving as the race went on. And halfway through the race, the rain started, and that suited me well. I moved in the road well, and I wouldn't say I was any better rider in the wet than any other body, but I suppose a lot of the top riders wasn't used to rain and bad weather the way I was, and when the laps I managed to get to the lead of it, and I always remember getting up behind Paddy Drivers in the lead at the time. When we were coming round Levenstown Bridge, I was right on behind him, and I suppose he didn't know I was there, but the crowd was all waving, and the driver thought it was him. They were waving at him. He stood up in the footpath and in the footrest and waved. And then he looked round and seen me behind him, and I'm telling you, he got started then. It was harder after that, but I managed to get by him at the finish up and won it. And I couldn't believe myself I won it, and still can't believe it. But I never would have won anything if it hadn't been for Joe Ryan. I had two elder brothers, and they were all into motorbikes, and I was used to motorbikes when I was no age at all, and I was riding bikes through the fields and air dakes and up planks and all sorts of things. And like Glen Ireland, I was racing the roads, and I had a wheen of mates that was the same, and we were always getting into scrapes with police and neighbours and one thing and another. So I decided I would try the race, and I thought, after watching a wheen of races, I thought I could go as quick as a lot of them boys, but I got my eyes opened when I tried it. I wasn't as good as I thought. That was presented to me by the Killinchy Motor Club in '66. After I retired for racing, they had a special dinner and presented me with this tray, and I was well pleased with that. I wasn't expecting anything like that. It was very nice of them and good of them. Oh, I retired in '65. About 7 years racing at that stage in '65. I'd been doing all the Irish races, and I had plenty of work to do at home, and I'd got married, and I was losing a lot of time away from work, and I wasn't going to make much more out in racing in Irish races. I would need it to, if I was going to improve, I would need it to try and went to better races maybe. And I just decided to stop. No, no regrets, no. When I made up my mind, I did make it up right, that was it, and I would just stick to it. There was an incident in the scrutineer, and that was, Joe, he always made his bikes look as bad as possible. The bike was perfect. There weren't a better bike on the Northwest or any race for that matter than the bikes that I had. And the bike would have leaked a bit of oil, and they would have sprinkled cement around it, to soak up the oil. It looked very bad, but it was effective. It done the job well, and anything Joe done was done right and perfect. But when I had the bikes onto the scrutineers and onto the 500, and the scrutineers, they knew the bikes was all right, they would have been happy enough, but it was some of the officials, and they were watching everything, and there were a whole queue was waiting to get the bike scrutineered, and when I come for it, they told me to take that bike away out of here and wash it. Then they bring it back here till it's clean. And when I turned back to Joe, he was annoyed. He said, right, we'll just put it in the van and we'll go home. That'll finish that. So he did do that, and he would have went home, but they apologised at the finish up, and they let us go.